Hi, I'm Michael Eggebrecht. I'm here at Empire Bakery Equipment's Test Bakery on Long Island, New York. Today we'll be making traditional baguettes with a Polish starter. To tell you a little bit about myself, I'm actually a 9th generation baker. I grew up in a bakery working for my father starting around age 11. From there I went on to work at some wonderful artisan bakeries around the United States as a plant manager, a bakery manager, and I opened my consulting business in 2004. From there I've been able to consult throughout North America, in the Middle East, and in Asia, and now I'm going to use some of that experience to show you how to make some wonderful artisan bread. So we have all of our pre-measured ingredients out here on the table for our baguette. And the starter we're using on this baguette today is a pouliche. A pouliche is basically equal parts flour and water with a small percentage of yeast, usually 0.1% yeast to the flour weight. A pouliche really is a great starter to bring in kind of a sweetness to the bread, of course, without using any sugar. It also imparts helps give you the open crumb texture that you're looking for in a traditional baguette. And it does help with shelf life as well because it creates a little bit of acid, which is it's a natural preservative, of course, in the bread. Here we have a third of all the flour. So if you envision that all the ingredients here for the entire dough are on the table, but a third of the flour has actually been fermenting in this box for about 14 hours. And I believe last night we were at 65 degrees when we mixed it. So 14 to 16 hours at that temperature works pretty well with 0.1% yeast. That's based on a fresh yeast number there. One reason I like to use a pouliche over maybe a stiffer starter like a biga is because pouliche can be mixed easily by hand. So you're not using actually a machine. It's very difficult to mix a biga by hand because it's so stiff. And the other thing is as you grow your business and you get larger and larger, as you can imagine, you can make many hundreds of pounds of pouliche if you're making a lot of baguettes, that you can start to use a levain tank or a liquid starter processing tank where it can be pumped into the mixing bowl and actually relieve the baker from that chore. So it's a good way to scale up your production. Well, let's get started mixing. All right, so to get started with the baguette, we're going to add the water and also the pouliche to the bottom of the bowl. Then we're going to put the flour in, and then we're going to just mix briefly and start an autolyse, which is where we let that mixture set for about 20 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the pouliche, which is already pre-measured. Go ahead and add the water. So we have a water meter that meters out the correct amount of water and also at the temperature, the desired temperature. So chosen 63 degrees based on the calculation to get my desired dough temperature. To get our water temperature, we have to do a little bit of calculation. So I want to show you my chart. Our desired dough temperature is 75 degrees. There's 4 factors that affect the temperature of the final dough. That's going to be our temperature of our flour, the temperature of the air, and the temperature of the pouliche. And then we have the friction factor of 28. Well, that is the amount of heat that's generated or the increase in temperature over the course of the mix. Now that number varies between different types of doughs. That's what I've figured out to be the friction factor for this particular recipe. Might be different for yours. Might be a little lower or a little higher. So if we take the multiplication factor of 4 times 75 gives us a total temperature factor of 300. So we take that 300 and we start subtracting the temperature values of each of these 4 factors. Then we arrive at 76 at the end. And that will be our water temperature for today. Here we're just going to add the flour just on top of the pouliche and water. All right, so we're just going to start in first speed and mix approximately about 4 minutes. We have our time set for 4 minutes and we're in first speed here on the mixer. This particular mixer comes with forward and reverse option when in first speed. So sometimes I like to go in reverse to incorporate the ingredients. It helps to do that sometimes a little bit quicker. Our goal here is just to get the flour hydrated and get rid of any large lumps. And other than that, then we're done to begin the autolyse period. The autolyse is good to fully hydrate the flour. It also helps kind of get to add extensibility later to the baguette. So we want to keep the mixing low so we don't oxidize, and also get the protease active. Protease softens the protein in the flour, which ultimately makes the baguette more extensible and easier to mold, since we're going to be molding, you know, something out to 22, 24 inches. So I don't use an autolyse on all my doughs, but it's a good option for the baguette. Right now, all we're doing is incorporating the ingredients, and we're just looking for the flour and water to become homogeneous. Basically hydrate all the flour. We're not looking for a lot of gluten development. We're just trying to get everything combined. Then we'll be stopping the bowl and resting the dough for 20 minutes. So at this time, it looks still a little lumpy, but this is where we can stop and rest the dough. I'm just going to scrape it down so these bits on the side of the bowl do not dry out. And then from there, we can just cover the dough and let it rest. It's been 20 minutes on the autolyse for this baguette, and so now it's time to add the yeast and the salt and finish out the mix. So I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle the yeast in over the top. Now I'm just going to wait a second to get the mixer started before I add the salt. I'm going to set the time for 3 minutes in first speed and 1 minute in second speed, and if I need to make a minor adjustment from there, I will. We have it on automatic, so it'll use both first and second, and we can begin the mix. Now, just looking at the development here, I'm just going to add just a touch of water, and that will also help the salt incorporate. What's interesting when you're mixing this particular baguette, how the dough changes literally every 10 seconds when you're mixing, when you go into second speed. There's a small window to mix it perfectly, where you're going to get that wide open crumb later after the bake. And so I'm going to start checking it and showing it to you as we go every 10 or 20 seconds in the mix. See that the dough is holding together, but it's the gluten network is very kind of thick and still shaggy. And so just literally another 10 seconds or 20 seconds, that will hold together and start to clear up. All right, so now we've mixed the dough about 10 more seconds, and just minor changes in the dough. So when I check for the structure, I just like to pull and turn it 90 degrees. As you can see that it's actually holding together, but it's still nice. It's still really thick. But that's pretty good for our baguette, because we're not looking for a tight crumb in the bread later on. Now, what I mean by crumb is that's the interior of the final loaf. So maybe you've heard of crust and crumb, so the exterior being the crust and inside being the crumb. And on that, we're looking for a very loose, which I mean wholly, crumb inside, or loose texture. And of course, we don't want holes such as faults from molding or something like that. We want natural fermentation holes, and you can always identify those because they're going to be shiny inside, and that'll bring different texture when you're eating the bread, and that's a different mouthfeel, and also allows you to pick up other flavors from the pouliche and the sweetness from the flour. Our goal temperature for this dough is 73 degrees. We came out a little bit cool. We were at 71.5. So I'm just going to make a minor adjustment in the fermentation. I'll probably put it in the proofer for the first half an hour or so and try to bring that up to 73. All right. Time to pull the dough out and get it in the dough tubs. So I'm just going to use a little bit of flour to keep the dough from sticking to my hands, and we're going to put 17.5 pounds in 2 boxes because we are going to use a hydraulic divider to divide the baguettes. So a 14-ounce baguette times 20 pieces in our hydraulic divider is 17.5 pounds. So let me get started here. So we're going to correct the dough temperature by putting it into the proofer on the proofer setting at about 85 degrees, from 71 degrees to 73, and then we'll be back on track. So it's 11:30, it's time to fold our baguette dough. We're just going to bring all of the ends into the center of the dough, even the sides, and then we're just going to flip it over and send it back onto the rack. Folding does a couple things. One, it distributes the temperature. If the core of the dough is warmer or cooler than the existing room temperature, then you might have a temperature difference between the inside of the dough and the exterior. So by folding, we're able to just balance that out, so it brings it all basically to one temperature. The other thing that's really the most important is the fact that we've developed strength. And it's like, how much strength have we just developed just by a couple turns? You'd be absolutely amazed just by reforming the gluten network of that baguette dough. So if the gluten network is disfigured and crossed, then by stretching the dough and elongating it, we're folding the gluten in line. And so therefore we've absolutely given it quite a bit of strength. So folding on the workbench is pretty straightforward. It's the same as using the dough tub. The one time that I might do this in a production situation would be if my dough came out, let's say, a little bit wet or is a little softer than I wanted it to be. By getting a little flour on the bench and dumping the dough out on the flour, not a lot, certainly not making a bed, but just a light dusting, by folding the dough, we'll actually pick up a little bit of that flour, and it could be a tool to use to, let's say, stiffen up the dough or firm up the dough slightly if it was a little bit wet when it came out of the bowl. When you're folding on the bench, it's the same technique. We just bring it over and fold it to the middle. And then once we have it folded in that, like that, then we can put it right back into the tub. So we're going to let these set for 1 more hour, and then we'll start dividing. All right, so we're going to divide the baguette dough now in the hydraulic divider into 20 pieces. We've got the dough weighed out in 17.5 pounds. Divide that by 20, it gives you 20 14-ounce pieces. So it's nice to use a little bit of flour, even if you, I know some of you may not want the flour in there, but it's nice to have a little flour because it helps the dough spread across the bottom. So we're just going to put an even coat in there, okay? So I want to make sure that the dough falls directly out into the hydraulic divider and doesn't flop over, so we have a double layer somewhere. So I'm just going to loosen it up from the bottom, not folding it over or anything. And when you dump, flip the tub quickly. And then square it up inside the machine. So we can put a little flour on the top and gently press it into the corners. So now we can just close the machine, latch it. We'll flatten it first, and then once we flatten it, we can cut it, and then we'll back off the pressure. Open the machine, and here we have it. 20 pieces. So now that we have the dough cut into 20 pieces, we can just put them on the board square and just rest them without any pre-shaping, which is what I recommend. Unless your dough is a little bit too soft, and then you can just give it a pre-shape into like the sausage shape that we've done previously. Today we're just going to do squares. Rest these for about 20 minutes, and then we'll put them through the molder. 10 to a board, and 2 boards per cut. Time to start shaping the baguettes now. I'm going to be using the French bread molder. We're just molding the squares that were divided in the hydraulic divider. So let's get started. So I'm using the French cloth referred to as couche, and that's But using this, it will support the baguettes during their final proof, and where they're all going to kind of hold each other up to make sure that we get a good, nice volume out of it and they don't pancake out. If you want to proof directly on a board, then you would have to maybe mix the dough a little firmer, or possibly use a little ascorbic acid to make the dough a little bit stronger so it can support its weight. But today we're using the cloth. So sometimes a molded baguette, the seams disappear. So I am trying to couche or place them in the cloth seam up. If I have a problem finding the seam, then pretty much that means it's sealed well enough that we're not going to have an issue later. So I take just a second, see if I can identify the seam. If not, I'll move on and try to make them in there, just put them in there straight as possible. So if you've never used couche before, then you'll want to flour them heavily for the first time if they're new. And then after you consecutively use them for a week or a month, then the flour becomes less and less till it's just a minimal amount. This is a new couche, so I've had to use more flour than normal today. So I'm going to demonstrate how to hand shape a traditional French baguette. I'll show you two ways. I use them both sometimes every other day, just depending on if the dough is a little soft, then I might have to do the double fold, and if it's a little bit stiffer, then I can just roll down. So I'll demonstrate the double fold first. So try to stretch out and get the baguette equal as like a rectangle there, straight sides and straight ends if possible. I just come down and just gently fold that into the middle. I'll turn it around, gently fold that into the middle. So then basically we've started our baguette. Now we just need to do one final fold down where this side meets the bottom. I'm going to seal with my hand so I can make a nice tight seam, and it'll also be a nice straight seam. So I'm just going to come down. I actually kind of step my body to the offset to the side and just come down there. So then we have the baguette that is about 12 inches long, and then I can just gently roll it out to the final length. So there we have our baguette. It's about 22 inches now maybe with the taper. I'm going to go seam up and into the couche there. So the other way is very, very similar. We'll just, again, rectangle with the sides that are square to one another or parallel to one another. So I'm just going to come down once, come down twice, maybe lightly seal, and come straight down a third time and seal completely. So this dough today prefers that second molding. It doesn't need any more body. It has plenty of strength, and it also has plenty of gas production in it. So really the method that this dough feels correct today is just to go down once, down twice, give it a stretch, down the third time and seal. Release from the table, start in the middle, and just work your way out to your proper length. You can decide if you want to taper the ends or not. All right, so the baguettes are all set for their final proof. They're going to take about an hour at room temperature. We could speed them up by using the proofer retarder, but that's not really the goal. We want to make sure that we keep them moving at a slow and steady pace. One thing to think about when you are proofing on racks like this at room temperature, that you want a heavy-duty rack cover if possible. If not, you can use the disposable bun pan rack covers. No matter what rack cover you use, it's nice to block off the bottom so it keeps airflow from coming up inside. It's pretty important to keep them from drying out and skidding over, because that'll affect our appearance of the final loaf coming out of the oven. It will make it drier and dustier looking, and it will also even keep the loaf from expanding properly if we were to dry out the loaves at this stage. So cover your bread and watch your temperature. We're at about 70 degrees in here, which is just right for this type of product. Just going to talk for a second about final proofing. Sometimes it can be a little bit tricky. So we have our baguettes that have been proofing here for about an hour, hour and 15 minutes, and we We're right about there. So what we have is as I push in, my fingerprint kind of springs back halfway. That's one rule of thumb. Ultimately, after baking your product a few times in a row each day, you're going to become familiar with it, the final proof, and whether or not you could have gone a little bit longer. When we see these baguettes come out of the oven, we're going to tell by how much the cuts opened up, and or we'll tell a lot about the bread from the look and appearance of the final loaf. So, but right now, these look ready to me. We're going to move forward. All right, so we're going to load our French baguettes into the Empire mini tube oven here. So in spacing your baguettes out, leave a couple inches between each one, definitely a half an inch to an inch off the back of the loader. The loader comes close to the back of the oven, but it's not necessarily touching the back of the oven, so we leave a half an inch, we should be good there. So for scoring, we really want to visualize the cuts need to fall within the center third of the loaf going down. It's common that some people or new bakers will score a baguette literally at a diagonal, like a 45-degree angle across the loaf. We want to avoid that because we want our cuts to overlap and also stay again in the center third, coming down the center of the oven. And we want to go tip to tip. So we're going to start at this tip and end at this tip with 5 cuts. The other thing is we want to turn the blade kind of at a 45-degree angle, so we're actually cutting at a diagonal into the loaf, but our cut isn't going diagonal across the loaf. All right, so to score, we're just going to angle a little bit, and we're going to come down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what we've done here is we've overlapped our cuts by about a third of the entire cut. That 25 to 33% of the cut, and each cut is overlapped. We go tip to tip. So again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, there we go. You know, it's interesting, we can already see inside the cut there, and I can tell, that the crumb is looking pretty decent on these. So I'm going to go ahead and pre-steam the deck before I go in. Then once that's done there, I'm just going to go ahead in, latch, and pull back. And now we're going to go ahead and steam and start. I find it very important, especially if you're not loading the deck all at once. I think it's important to pre-steam. So we're baking for 23 minutes, give or take there a minute or so. These are great. Those are pretty nice there. So we've got all our baguettes out for display here, and picking through them, I would like to cut these open, and we'll share with you what we achieved today. We'll start with this one. This is a nice baguette with the 5 cuts. They're all symmetrical, and each of the cuts have all opened pretty nicely. So let's see where we stand here. Here we have the baguette. It's still a little hot, so it's the knife drug a little bit. But we can see that inside we have a pretty open crumb throughout the bottom here. It looks like on this one, on this side over here, there was a little bit of an extra fold, so it's a little denser right in that section. But overall, it's a very nice baguette. I'd like to show you the baguette that we cut at kind of the odd angle where we were saying earlier that just cutting at a diagonal there doesn't give the baguette a chance to open as much. So let's cut this open and see what we have underneath the cut and also underneath the solid part. So as you can see, these have roughly the same amount of cuts, but the length of the cuts and how this one, the cuts overlapped. So there's on every space going down the loaf that there was proper expansion. Over here you actually can see it's kind of does the dog bone shape in several different spots going down the length of the baguette. So overall, this is a very open crumb baguette. If I'm being extra picky, then I'm just looking at the edges here that are a little denser than maybe the middle. I do like to see the P-shaped holes, lots of those. So this is the baguette that should be more dense throughout. It's going to have some areas where it's more open, and then it's going to have some areas where it's denser. We can see that, you know, underneath the cut, which right here would be a cut, underneath the cut there was some expansion, and then there's denseness here, and then expansion again. And it continues to kind of do that throughout the loaf. You can compare that to the baguettes that was cut correctly, and there was expansion equally all the way down the loaf. Well, thanks for joining us today at Empire Bakery Equipment and taking your time to follow along while we made the traditional French baguette. Hopefully you were able to pick up something new that you hadn't seen before today. And if you have any questions or comments about anything that we've done in this video, please look in the links below. Reach out to Empire and we'll be happy to get back to you and answer and follow up with you anytime.